All right. Got it. Great. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Fred, AB1OC from Hollis, New Hampshire. And thanks for the opportunity to be with you all tonight. I'm going to mostly be talking about mentoring and what that might mean for your club and for amateur radio. I've had the pleasure to be involved in a lot of different mentoring projects over the last 7 or so years. And I'm going to try to share some of those with you, and hopefully some of those things might be fun for you all to try out as well. So with that, let's get into it here. And let's see, I think we've got everything going here. All right. Let's see, have we got it? All right, if you all can see my screen, give me a thumbs up. I'd just like to make sure that it's working great. All right. So the picture on the cover here is one mentoring project I'm going to talk a little bit about. It's a group of middle school kids about to talk to an astronaut on the space station with amateur radio. And you know, what I would say about mentoring is that there is no like one silver bullet that works best, except that the groups that I know of that pick something to mentor around that they truly enjoy doing, that they're passionate about, seem to do the best. So I'm going to kind of do this in two parts tonight. I'm going to talk about some activities that work for hams of all ages, and then towards the end we're going to focus a little bit more on what's possible in schools as well. So with that, let's dive in. My club, just to give you a little background, about 7 years ago, we had dwindled down to a roster of about 30 members. Maybe half were still paying dues. And if we got 10 at any event, we thought we were doing really good. So we were not in such great shape. And around that time, around 6 years ago, we decided to rededicate ourselves to new ham development and mentoring. And as I sit with you today, we're 440 members, growing by 1 to 2 people without recruiting every week. I believe now we're one of the largest, if not the largest, amateur radio groups in New England. And almost all of that growth is a result of our focus on mentoring and new ham development. To give you a little context for this, we teach license classes. We teach 7 classes a year, Tech General and Extra every spring and every fall, and at least one for school students to earn their tech, somewhere in between all that. And about 3 years ago, we started looking closely at how many of the folks that took a class with us ended up active and on the air as hams. And what we found is only about 25% of the new techs that we licensed, which was about half of the 370 people that we touched, were actually on the air after a year. And we thought, oh my goodness, we must really be doing something wrong. So I started talking to people like Gordon West, who's heavily involved in licensing, and some of the people down at the league. And those folks were saying, no, you guys are doing great. We think that number is more like 15%. Which, if you stop and think about it, that's a pretty sad state of affairs. All the work that amateur radio folks collectively put into VE exams and license classes, pretty sad if only maybe best case a quarter of those people ever actually become active hams. So we started a program called Ham Boot Camp. I'll talk a little bit more about this. Some of you may have heard of it. It's specifically designed to help people get basic stations together and get on the air. We do it in a couple different pieces, which I'll go through in a minute. We piloted this on the back of our license classes with small groups for the first year or two, kind of refined the content of it. COVID hit and we took it online. The first time we took it online, we had an article in QST and some good help from the league in publicizing it. We had 280 people sign up for Ham Boot Camp. Now, Ham Boot Camp is very basic. It's like, you know, how do I pick an HT and program it? How do I make a QSO on a repeater? How do I put a 20-meter dipole and a 100-watt radio together? There's nothing that's particularly advanced. It's all a beginner's exercise. The second time we did Ham Boot Camp online 6 months later, we had 480 people sign up. And what you're looking at on the chart here is a breakdown of the license classes of those people. What does it tell us that out of a group that large, over 60% that signed up for a basic mentoring class had a general, an advanced, or an extra class license. What that told us is that there is a tremendous need and demand for mentoring in amateur radio. There are a lot of hams out there who put a lot of work into getting their licenses, in some cases, multiple licenses, that are looking for somebody to help them to learn how to do amateur radio. So this is actually quite a good opportunity for clubs and groups of folks who want to get involved in mentoring activities, to make a lot of new friends, and also to attract a lot of folks to your club. So some of the things that we did, and these are just kind of different ideas of things that worked out. One of the first things we did as a group is we started doing our license classes. And in a matter of a year, we grew to almost 100 members from that 30 base. And that was a really good problem, except that we now had 70% of our club was licensed less than a year, which had some pretty unique challenges. So a lot of enthusiasm to do new things, and a lot of folks who really were looking for mentoring help. So one of the first things that we did is we created a program called Tech Night, that was designed for new hams, to just have our members teach other members how to do stuff. It's a second meeting that we have every month. It's all member done. We generally don't bring a lot of folks in for the outside, although we have done that on occasion. And the way we came up with the topics is we just brainstormed up a collection of all the things that people wanted to learn about. I know the text here is small. I'll drop a copy of the presentation in the chat when we're done, so you all can look closer at this if you want to. And, you know, given that some of our members were very experienced hams, many of them were new hams, we had quite a range of stuff. Everything from basic things like, you know, how do I get an HT together and get it programmed, all the way up to some pretty advanced stuff like, you know, how do I build a satellite station or do moon bounce? These things are very much demonstration, hands-on oriented. You can see an example of one of our members at a Tech Night on directional antennas. He went down to the plumbing department at Home Depot and got himself a bunch of fittings and tees and pipe. And he made a 2-meter Yagi that he could put together one element at a time and transmit through. And then in his right hand there, he's got a 2-meter dipole with a light bulb on it that he can move around as he's putting his 3-element Yagi together. And folks can actually visually see how it forms a pattern. So he gets it was kind of a Tech Night on, you know, how a directional antenna works. These things have been very popular. We've been doing them now for over 5 years, and I think we have about 130 hours of video. We record them all and put them online, and it's a great training resource on just about anything that you can imagine in amateur radio as we bring new folks into the fold. And it's also a lot of fun. So I mentioned this thing called Ham Boot Camp, and you know, one of the things that we learned by talking with people that went through our license classes is we learned a lot about what are kind of the barriers that new hams have to getting on the air. So for techs, it's pretty basic stuff. It's like, you know, oh my God, I'm afraid to get on the repeater and say anything because I'm not sure I know what to say and I don't want to make a fool out of myself. So it's kind of like mic fright plus, I guess, as I would call it. So what did we do to get around that? Well, you can see here's an example in the upper left of a ham boot camp where a bunch of new folks are all sitting around a table with HTs with a coach, and we're going to simulate on a 70-centimeter simplex channel, basically making first a two-way QSO and then a multi-way QSO on a repeater. We also go through a scenario where folks check into a net and get to hear how to do that. So we get at a couple things with doing this. We get people over the fear that they don't know how to do it because we practice doing it and answer everybody's questions. And we also get folks, you know, kind of over the whole mic fright thing and make sure they kind of know how to comfortably use their tech license to make a contact on a repeater. For the HF side, we talk about how to put a basic antenna up, usually a 20-meter dipole, 100-watt radio, how to get a key and headset hooked up, how to get your computer hooked up, and basically just how to put a basic HF station together. Boot camp for us has evolved to a one-day program. You can see this is kind of what we cover in boot camp. I think the next one is scheduled for like November 13th. We've got about 100 people registered for it so far. And what I would say about doing something like this is that we did not, build a complicated or robust program for boot camp. Matter of fact, the first time we did it, I think we practiced checking into a repeater and talked about programming HTs, and that was it. And as we went through it, we kind of built it up and added things to it till it kind of became the program it is here. But even if you just pick one or two topics that new hams or maybe new generals might find useful, and build a mentoring activity around those topics, you'll find that and you publicize it reasonably well, you'll find that you'll attract a lot of people, because there are a ton of folks out there who have amateur radio licenses. They're already licensed and they don't really know what to do with them, or maybe they've upgraded from tech to general or even higher, but really don't know quite how to go about putting an HF station together. So all good stuff to do, and also relatively easy to do. If you notice, this boot camp program, even though we serve literally hundreds of people every time we do this, it's put on by, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people. And all in now, we've served over 750 folks in just about every state in the United States, and Canada and Hawaii and Alaska, and even India and the UK. So it's not hard to put together a quality mentoring program. You just need to start small and keep building. So some other things that you can do. And by the way, if you all have any questions or comments on any of this stuff as we go, please just dive in and ask away. Don't wait. Also, if you've tried similar programs and have some good ideas, I'd love, and I'm sure everybody else would love to hear those as well. So another simple thing that you can do is simply make your station available to a group of new hams. This was one particular project, probably one of the most fun weekends that I've ever experienced in amateur radio. Someone in our club suggested that, they know we have a station that's capable of doing some contesting. They suggested that instead of doing the next DX contest, that my wife and I stand down and make the next DX contest a training opportunity for the newer folks in our club. So that, with the goal of having the club earn a DXCC. And so that's what we did. We started out, we chose CQ Worldwide DX, which is one of the bigger Worldwide DX contests. And we started out on Friday evening and did a training session to get everybody comfortable with how to use N1MM and how to use the equipment in the station, how contesting works, how to figure a little bit about, what bands and directions to operate in at a given point in time in the contest. And then we had people sign up for anywhere from an hour to operate up to 4 hours to operate. And I would say through the course of the contest weekend, we maybe cycled 20, 25 people through our station that operated at different levels. And it was absolutely amazing. Now, our station's set up so we can handle 2 operators. Some folks teamed up in pairs where one person would, be on the air and the other person would be logging for them. So we had some of that going on. So I guess, we had 3 to 4 folks in the shack operating, plus at times, plus Anita and I there coaching. At the end of the day, I think the group worked like 125, 127 DXCCs, of course, earned the club a DXCC, and they had an absolute blast doing it. Every time they worked someplace that they never heard of, there'd be a little bit of a high five session. Folks would figure out where that place was and, get all excited about contacting some place that they probably never heard of. And the best part of this was that the next time we did a tech night on how to build an HF station, all those people came back because they were really anxious to figure out how to either get on the air with HF or maybe upgrade the stations that they already had so they could do, this kind of activity as well. Are any of you involved in the 13 Colonies special event or any other special events? Did any of you all do that?
Yep.
Yep, good. So 13 Colonies, I think, is another great opportunity to mentor. I'm the state manager for K2K New Hampshire. And for those of you who've done 13 Colonies, you probably know that it's a pretty intense set of pileups for the first few days. But if you get 2 or 3 days in, things start to settle down. And this can actually be by inviting a new ham into your station while you're operating, as I guess you guys would be, what, K2M there? As you're operating 13 colonies, what you can do is start the inexperienced ham out logging for you while you operate. Let them learn to hear the call signs through the pileup and how the protocol goes. And then what I'll usually do is I'll switch places and I'll log for the newer person while they operate on the air. And then if they get really confident, we take the training wheels off, I hand over the microphone and the keyboard and sit on the other side of the room and say, have at it, I'm here if you have any questions. And the nice thing about an operation like 13 colonies, field day can work this way as well in busy periods, is the new person gets a lot more experience in a short period of time than they can easily get maybe at their own station. In 13 colonies, even an inexperienced operator can approach 100 calls an hour on sideband with a little bit of coaching. And if somebody sits with you for 2 or 3 hours and does that till they probably get kind of tired, they'll probably get more operating experience than they might get at their home station in months. So it's a great way to spend some time mentoring. It's also a good opportunity to take a new ham and answer questions about how your station's put together, and maybe look at the equipment. And most new folks have just tons and tons of questions about how to do stuff. So these kinds of operate for a day or operate for a few hours together activities can make great mentoring projects. Field day. It sounds like you all do field day, which is great. We do too. My club has got a long history of doing some pretty big field days. I think back in the 70s or 80s, we did a 23 or 24 alpha field day. Lots of towers and all that kind of stuff. Our pre-COVID, we were probably doing 10 alpha, 12 alpha, 13 alpha type deals. We actually managed an in-person field day that I think we were 3 or 4 alpha this year. We did a smaller one due to the COVID restrictions. But at any rate, field day, I think, is a wonderful mentoring opportunity. The way we approach this is if a person comes out and helps us set our field days up, and they're new, we give them first shot at any operating slot that they want. If you're a brand new ham and you're at your first field day and you want to take it on, you can have 20-meter sideband at 4 o'clock at our field days. And we'll sit somebody down with you who's a more experienced operator, and we'll work with you to make sure you're successful. It really hasn't hurt our performance in field day. We've been first or second in every category we've entered since we've been doing this. We were actually number 2 overall in the last winter field day before COVID in the United States. And what we found is that by giving the new people the opportunity to operate, they are very, very enthusiastic, and many of them will make up for their maybe limited experience with some very intense operating. I'll just tell you a little story about that. Abby, who is one of our younger operators, she's on the left there operating with her brother. Now she's a really exceptional ham. She got her all the way to extra class on her 13th birthday and really loves amateur radio. I remember Abby's first field day really well. We got at a local school on a Friday night. We got our first tower up and kind of one of the sideband stations, or a few of them together. And it was about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And Abby came to me and said, "Can I operate a little bit? I've never had a chance to use a tower and a beam before." So we said, "Sure, go knock yourself out." So she operated from about, let's say, 8 or 9 o'clock till about 1 in the morning on Friday night, till her dad finally drug her off and said, "We're going home now." Saturday, she started up at 2 o'clock and she never stopped until 2 o'clock on Sunday. Literally went straight through 24 hours. And I remember it really well, coming into the 75-meter sideband tent on Sunday morning at about 8 or 8:30 a.m. And 75 was pretty well cooked at that point. Abby looked up to me. She was obviously very tired, growled a little bit and said, "I've worked everybody on this band. I need a new one." And, to me, that kind of enthusiasm by putting a new ham, kind of in the front of field day operating is just priceless. Abby at our last field day was top sideband operator of the whole group. Nobody can touch her skills as a sideband operator at this point in our club. She's very, very good. And the other thing that you gain when you do this is you make a very positive statement and create very positive impressions on the part of the general public about what amateur radio can do for people. Most of us do our field days in fairly public places, and if you work at it a little bit, you can get some coverage. We've had local community cable channels pretty regularly come out and send camera crews. We even had WMUR, who's kind of a regional TV station, I guess, here in New England, sent a reporter crew out to cover one of our field days. And what I'd like you to pay attention to while I play this video is how the reporters portrayed amateur radio to what probably was a group of maybe conservatively 50,000 viewers on field day evening. And think about what that might mean. So here we go.
While practicing for a possible emergency.
Next at 6, how these amateur radio operators are getting ready for any disaster.
Amateur radio operators across the country and Canada set up radio equipment this weekend for an event called Field Day.
And while it is a contest, it's also a chance for operators to practice their emergency response capabilities so they're ready to provide communications if a disaster strikes. Dozens took part at Hudson Memorial School, working completely off the grid, simulating a real emergency.
What we've taught some of the kids in the school here about is how you actually track and talk and do communications through a satellite in space.
One of the main things we like to do is really further the education of STEM curriculum in local schools. This has been a partnership with the Hudson Middle School.
Tango, Radio Tango.
Trained some as young as 12 years old. That is incredible. Good for them.
And they actually started setting up yesterday. They went 24 hours. So in that kind of unsettled weather that we had, they were still going. So
wow.
Pretty impressive.
Good for them. That's
Might
awesome.
be a little.
When you do this kind of work to put new folks in front, you work on skill building, and you also involve, through public relations, the media like this. You really accomplish a lot in terms of some of the challenges we face of amateur radio. We have had a lot of concern recently for losing bands, HOA, homeowners restrictions about putting antennas up and so on. And it's really public support and public pressure is what's going to break down those barriers for us. And so when you invest in training folks and you make that visible to the general public, you basically can create a lot of positive awareness and a lot of positive support for amateur radio. And that's really, really important if we're actually going to get some of the bills that are being written to protect our rights, actually get them into law. So, all right. The next part of this is about work more focused towards schools. Before I go there, does anybody have any questions or comments on anything that we've talked about so far? Anything at all? No? Okay. All right. So have you all done work with any local schools, or has anybody been involved in bringing amateur radio or STEM learning into schools? Anybody doing that? Okay. Are you all still with me, by the way? I hope I haven't lost y'all. No, it looks like I still am. I can see Selena smiling, so somebody's hearing me anyway. All right. Well, let me talk a little bit about work in schools and what that might be all about. Now, we've been involved in 4 or 5 schools here in New Hampshire over the past 5 or 6 years. And what I'll tell you is it's not easy to build a strong relationship with a school. It takes some continued commitment, and I think it also takes the. But if you approach it the right way, you can build some pretty deep relationships to the point where you will be welcomed into schools to be the teacher. And what you'll be teaching is stuff related to amateur radio, which is a pretty powerful thing to do. So the thing that has worked the best for us here is to try to understand what the teachers are trying to teach their students and then bring amateur radio activities and learning to support what they're already trying to teach. Now, most schools have a focus on something called STEM learning. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It's basically a realization, I think, on the part of most educators that learning in those areas and the careers that STEM kinds of topics lead to are very important for our future as a country. Most schools are measured on their ability to do this, and most schools, particularly public ones, have significant amounts of STEM-oriented content that are built into their curriculum. And so a good way to begin is many schools have out-of-school activities. Some schools do something called Pie Night, which is a kind of a STEM-oriented after-school activity. It's almost like a science fair that many schools will do, and they'll invite in folks from industry and so on that are related to people with engineering and scientific technical careers to come and be part of their STEM night displays to introduce the kids to the kinds of things that this can lead to. Okay, so those are relatively easy to get involved in. If you go and look at your local school's websites or their Facebook pages, or even you just make a call to the school office and ask if they do a Pie Night or any after-school oriented STEM activities that you can contribute to. You can find out about those things. What we'll typically do is we'll make a little display up with kind of a trifold board with some PowerPoints on it that show pictures of amateur radio stations and what you can do with amateur radio. We'll take some Morse code keys and some Morse code activities and charts in, because what we find is middle school and high school kids actually enjoy playing with Morse code quite a lot. We'll take a Fox, a hidden radio transmitter, and we'll hide it in the auditorium or the gym or the cafeteria where they hold these things, and bring a couple HTs that the kids can use to try to find it. If the school has good internet, we'll bring in one of our HF stations remotely and let the kids see and experience what HF is like. Most importantly, when you do these things, you'll get a chance to meet the teachers and some of the more involved parents in the school. And that's where oftentimes you can begin the conversation about, what are you trying to teach, and begin to offer up some amateur radio-based activities that will support what the kids are already learning. Where that led next for us was an opportunity in a couple local high schools to participate in their weekly school clubs. Now, most schools, high schools particularly, have a club time. They usually have it once a week where the kids can pick a club that they want to participate in with their friends. And schools will have electronics clubs. Some of the local high schools have STEM clubs where they kind of do a broad range of technological and science-related activities. These can be great places to offer up an activity. And one thing that we've done is kit builds in these clubs. You can see some pictures on the lower right there, where we teamed up kids in pairs, taught them how to solder, and we gave them simple kits. In the case of the lower right, the two students are working on a 40-meter CW transmitter that they're building. And when they're done with their kits, we organized a Morse code competition where the kids basically had to send and receive a Morse code phrase with the kit they built. We give them a buddy pole and a KX3 and a set of headsets so they have a decent receiver. And it's kind of like a little bit like the Jay Leno Morse code style competition. If any of you saw that, where the text message person tries to compete with a pair of Morse code operators. Well, ours are all Morse code operators, but it's the same sort of thing where they're competing to send a phrase and see who can do it first accurately, and then who can do it the fastest. By this point, we were in two high schools, and both schools got their kids out of classroom time to do the competitions. So now we're starting to not only be part of the after school club, but we're starting to get some allocation of classroom time because the teachers are seeing the value of the practical experience that their kids. And I'll tell you a little story just for fun. The two girls in the lower right, they were in a local high school. When they did their competition, the girl on the left head copied what the girl on the right sent at 12 words per minute Morse code the first time. Now, when we teach these kids, we only spend a couple hours, 3 hours of time teaching them the basics of Morse code and letting them practice. So, we thought either we're the geniuses of teaching Morse code or there's something else going on here. Well, it turned out that pair of kids had been tapping Morse code out with their pencils when they were bored in class for several years ahead of time, and they were actually fairly skilled CW operators, although the pencil thing was a little crude on the timing. But what we have found seriously through this whole process is that middle school and high school students actually enjoy very much learning Morse code, and that can be a great activity to bring into that kind of environment. So where this went next, by this point in time, the schools that we were working with were pretty happy with what we were doing. And so what we went next is we said, okay, let's create a real STEM learning project around amateur radio. And what we came up with was the idea of putting together and launching a high altitude weather balloon that carried an amateur radio transponder payload to measure the conditions in the atmosphere. And we actually did a GoFundMe, surprisingly raised all the money we needed to do this in like 5 weeks to get the equipment. And we worked with the teachers that in the 2 high schools that we were involved in that we now had a pretty strong relationship with. And we developed a whole 10-session curriculum around all the stuff that went into flying a weather balloon. So we learned about buoyancy, we learned about gravity, we learned about parachute dynamics, we learned about weather conditions in the jet stream. We even taught the kids about how to file a flight plan with the FAA. And we built this whole curriculum around basically learning what makes the balloon work and how the amateur radio portion of the telemetry work. We had the kids use simulators to basically engineer the flight of their balloon. It turns out that you can control the altitude that the balloon will burst at by how much helium you put in it and the conditions. And you can also model fairly accurately the track that the balloon will fly over if you know jet stream and ground weather conditions fairly close to when you launch it. So we go through this whole process with the kids. They take their balloon out with their prediction and what it's going to do. They launch it, they track it using amateur radio. They collect all the telemetry data, and then they do a post-flight analysis of the telemetry data against what they predicted and kind of do a report where they explain anything that didn't match. So now we're doing all kinds of stuff that's supporting what they're doing in science classes and other things that they're learning with real hands-on projects that are based on amateur radio. What I have here is a video, and I'm just going to play the highlights of this to give you a feel for what this is like. The picture that you're seeing there are actually 2 schools that work together at the same time, and they're about to launch their balloon. The teacher there is actually holding the balloon, ready to go. And this will give you a feel for what this is all about. So here we go. So this is all lightweight stuff. Here the kids are putting together the platform, getting ready to launch. There's the 2-meter APRS transmitter. And this thing also has GoPro cameras and a computer on it. The balloon, just so I don't have to compete with the music, uses a parachute. And what happens is it'll go up to a fairly high altitude where there's almost no air pressure. The balloon bursts, and then it comes back down on the parachute to basically create a controlled descent. There's the APRS telemetry. Checking that out.
Here we are.
Balloon N1FD-11. See it there? So we know that transmitter is Go, Brian. Go, Brian.
Now the balloon also carries 2 GoPro cameras, so that kids can actually see what it looks like to be at very high altitudes in the troposphere and just on the edge of the stratosphere. One of them looks out at the horizon, and the other one in the upper right corner looks up at the balloon. Now, that flight line is about 40 feet long. And what you'll notice if you pay attention to that camera is how much the balloon grows as the pressure drops before it bursts. So I'm going to kind of skip through this a little bit. The video's kind of long and give you a feel for, basically what the kids can experience through a project like this. And all the data on the altitude, the temperature, the pressure, all that kind of stuff is all coming from the onboard telemetry to the ground via amateur radio APRS. Oh, my computer jumped on me. Hold on a second, we'll get back there. Sorry about that. Not sure why my Mac does this, but at any rate, here we go again. Let's go a little further ahead. So you can see these balloons basically will fly right up to the edge of the stratosphere and to some fairly low pressures. And temperature does some interesting things as you go through the atmosphere, which is one of the things you can learn about in the classroom part. See, the balloon's already grown quite a lot because the pressure's dropped. So this is what the balloon looks like when it bursts. Now, one of the cool things we can do, the pressure at this altitude is less than 1/10 of 1% of ground. It's almost a vacuum. And one of the things we have the students do is they use the onboard telemetry to measure the acceleration due to gravity in what is close to a vacuum and verify that it's what they're learning in class, which is 32 feet per second. So you can see how we use the amateur radio component to build and support a whole set of STEM learning topics that the kids are already studying. And that, believe me, is a very powerful draw for schools. We have one middle school before COVID that actually made this a standard part of their curriculum. And for every school year, they would take 2 hours out on every Friday for a whole half a year, where the teachers who we had licensed would teach this with us backing them up in the classroom. And of that 2 hours, 45 minutes was always devoted to a hands-on amateur radio activity, a fox hunt, a satellite contact, Morse code, talking on a local repeater. We did all kinds of things, again, with classroom time, talking about an amateur radio activity as a school activity. So skipping ahead. We'll get to the interesting part. So here's what the thing looks like in descent. The parachute's open at this point. We're probably at about 40,000 feet on our way down. This is an example of the telemetry. Now the computer on the balloon basically bursts this data out on 2-meter APRS every minute. And you can see what the balloon is sending to the ground is altitude, GPS coordinates, direction, temperature, pressure, and altitude. And the data does two things for us. One is it forms the actual flight track, which the kids compare against what they predicted. And it also allows us to find the balloon and fly it again. And this next part is what a typical track looks like. This particular flight, the modeling was quite accurate. We launched on the western edge of New Hampshire, almost in Vermont, and ended up in Maine. And if you were to compare the model version to this, which is the actual telemetry, each one of those red dots was a minute apart from the balloon. They match almost perfectly. So these kids didn't have a lot of explaining to do, unfortunately. And here's what we're
So here we are, out in the kayak, and here is the hat, and it looked like it hit a tree because there's you can see some branches down.
So you can see a pretty good view of the balloon. We fly in the upper part corner there. That's the computer with the GPS. Just to the right of that on the triangle is that little white thing is the temperature and pressure sensor. You can see one of the two GoPro cameras and the parachute. And of course, that black thing with a red light on is the APRS transmitter. And if you listen closely to the audio, you can hear it's still bursting out APRS as we recover it. The only thing I would say about flying balloons in New England is you need two things for success. You need somebody with a boat, and you need someone who can climb a tree. And we've used both heavily in our five flights doing this. But really, it's a great project for STEM learning, and it's also a lot of fun for all of us who do these launches.
There with it.
All right. So again, if you kind of focus on supplementing what the teachers are already trying to teach with amateur radio activities, and you can be a little creative about it, you can work your way into some pretty tight relationships with schools that involve actually bringing amateur radio in the classroom. The school that you're seeing, pair of schools that you're seeing in the picture there with the teacher holding the balloon, one of them, I got a call from the principal about a year ago asking me, would I teach a class for credit as an elective in her school on amateur radio? And of course, it took me about 5 milliseconds to decide that that was a great opportunity and get on that. So we did that. We had about 30 or 40 kids, probably about 40 kids go through that. And it was done. It was so popular, the principal called me back and said, we have a whole bunch more kids and some that want to do more. Can you do a second class? So we ended up doing two for a total of 4 hours, and probably all in maybe ran 80 to 100 kids in that school through a class where they pretty much spent 2 to 4 hours learning about amateur radio and all the technology behind it. So the last thing that I want to share is probably what I believe is one of the very best ways to help bring amateur radio into a school. And there's a program called ARIS, Amateur Radio on the International Space Station, that helps schools arrange to talk to and do Q&A with an astronaut on the International Space Station using amateur radio. I don't know, have any of you ever been involved in an ARIS contact? Do you all know about ARIS or what these things are? Anybody ever do one of these? No? Okay. Well, so the way this works, a school, to get a contact like this, has to apply and go through kind of a selection process. And the criteria for the selection include incorporating space science and amateur radio into their school curriculum. They have to have an amateur radio club partner with them to do the amateur radio part of the curriculum and possibly build the ground station. The process takes about a year. So if you're a partner amateur radio club for one of these contacts, you will have about at least a 6-month period where the school will be looking for you to do stuff with their school to help the kids learn about communications, amateur radio, and space science. These are big events. They almost always will involve not only the whole school, but the whole school district. And typically we'll have hundreds of people viewing them in real time. And by the time that folks look at usually what is an online live stream, there are usually 5,000 to 10,000 viewers. So this is a great way, again, not only to introduce young people to amateur radio and STEM careers, but also a great way to introduce the public to the value that amateur radio brings. The way the whole process works is the school goes through all of the effort to do their educational program, including the amateur radio parts. They'll either work with a local amateur radio club to build the ground stations for the actual contact, or ARIS, of which I'm a member, can provide a member's radio station to provide the radio link if the local amateur radio club doesn't want to do that. The ISS, which is in low Earth orbit, will come up over the school, spend about 10 to 15 minutes overhead where the students will talk live with an astronaut, doing a Q&A using 2-meter amateur radio simplex. And most schools will also do a program ahead of time to kind of explain to the general public and all the parents and usually their school board and elected officials and so on, kind of what's going on. So it's a great way to introduce amateur radio to young people. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to normally these contacts will last several hours between the pre-program and the contact and everything that happens. I've got kind of a shortened video here that will just show you the highlights of what one of these things is about. If I can get my video to cooperate with me, let's try that one more time. Come on. There we go. And normally you'll have about 10 students asking about 15 to 20 questions. We're only going to watch a couple of those in the interest of time, but I think the video will give you a pretty good feel for what doing one of these is like.
Hudson Memorial School, this is a very exciting and unique opportunity for us. Okay? This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the students of Hudson Memorial School to watch us make contact with astronauts from NASA in outer space on the International Space Station.
All right. As Mr. Bowen said, this is a truly unique event that you guys get to be a part of. And he did the welcomes to all the people that are here in the room. But I'm going to welcome all the elementary students that are probably watching us on live feed right now. The logo over to the far right is the Nashua Area Radio Society. They have been a huge part of this. Without them in this part, there would be no contact for you. The amount of hours, we probably can't even put together the amount of hours that the folks of this club put in to make sure that everything's happening. Also, they want to encourage and help people to become licensed and active in the amateur radio service. And you will see that over the course of the year, there are 2 students that are asking questions here that now have their amateur radio license.
So this can also be a great opportunity to invite and license young people, because the level of interest that these kids have in amateur radio is off the scale by the time you do this. Now, these are 2 students that we had licensed pre-contact in this school. Ryan, KC1KJS, I earned his general at 12 years old, is a very enthusiastic young ham. And Kenzie, KE1NZI, NZY, we got all the way to extra at 10 years old, which was quite a project in itself. But both very enthusiastic amateur radio operators. And one of the coolest things, because they were licensed and used their call sign on the air, they actually got personal QSL cards from their astronaut to commemorate their contact, which was really special. So at any rate, here we go.
It's because of them.
1 minute to contact. The antennas are beginning to position. If you look at the video on the upper right of the screen, you can see the antennas tracking in on the ISS. November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra, November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. This is November 1 Foxtrot Delta, over. Hi, hello Serena. This is November 1 Foxtrot Delta. We copy you fine. We've all been working very hard for about a year to prepare for this day, and we very much appreciate you taking the time to answer our questions. Are you ready for the students' questions? Over.
I am ready. Over. This is Ryan, KC1KJS. What does it feel like when exiting the atmosphere? Over.
It's amazing. When our rocket lit and we knew those engines were going, we knew we were going somewhere really, really quickly, and it was the most amazing feeling to feel that thrust, take that rocket off, and last for about 8.5 minutes before we reached orbit. Over.
This is Kenzie, KE1NZY. How long have you been a licensed amateur radio operator, and do you use your license for any other communications besides ARIS? Over.
I've been a licensed radio operator now for probably only about 1.5 years in preparation for this space flight, and I've only had the chance to use it up here in the Space station, and I've really enjoyed doing that, including just making random contacts across the United States and other countries. So I'm hoping to get to continue that after the mission. Over.
This is Abby. The students of Hudson Memorial School wish to thank you for talking with us today. Over.
Thank you, Hudson Memorial School in New Hampshire. It was fantastic talking with you. Have a great rest of your school year.
Thank you, Serena. N1FD clear.
You know, I'll just tell you a little story here. This really inspires, these kids quite a lot. There was one particular student in this group that apparently really struggled with mathematics. And the teacher in the upper left there that kind of was running this at the school is the head of the math department. He told me this story a few days after the contact, that student had come up to the teacher afterwards and was so inspired by the whole experience that he said, can I do some extra things? I really want to catch up on math and do better so that maybe someday I can do something like this, like you all did. And, you know, when you do this kind of work in schools, you're not going to license all the kids. You'll license a few of them. But what you will do is you'll make a difference in their lives. And it'll go much beyond just the 10 or so kids that ask questions. You'll inspire the whole school. And in fact, you'll also do another important thing, which is inspire a lot of adults to realize how important amateur radio is to the future of young people. You know, I'm sure some of you have had this same experience. I know I have, that amateur radio at an early age oftentimes sets a young person down a path to do something great with their lives. Maybe they'll become a technician or an engineer or a scientist, or they'll be enough inspired to pursue a career around mathematics or some other professional career that changes their lives. And so when you make these kinds of investments, you really do make a much bigger difference than just for amateur radio, although the amateur radio part is a pretty big piece of this. Every time I go to visit this school, if I always try to get through the office, because if the principal sees me, he will come out of his office and ask me what we're going to do next together in amateur radio in his school. So you can, you know, if you get involved in an activity like this and help a school, you'll find that you'll build a very, very strong relationship. The other thing I want to point out is, again, the importance of building public support this way for amateur radio. You know, if I had to go into the town of Hudson, New Hampshire, where we did this contact, and get a bill passed in the town making it easier for amateur radio people to put antennas up, I get 50 parents at that town meeting in a heartbeat after this. Why? Because all of those people in that audience realize how much of a difference amateur radio is making for their kids. This is how we're going to get legislation passed that actually means something to protect our rights. All right. Again, lots of different ways that you all can be involved in mentoring and helping folks. Just a few more that I'll mention. The lower right, Jamboree on the Air with the Scouts, that just took place this weekend, could be an excellent way to encourage new people, and particularly young people, to get involved in amateur radio. Many schools have career days where they'll invite professional people, and that's what I'm doing in the upper left there, to talk about what they do. Now, I'm a trained electrical engineer, and whenever I go to career day, I'll talk about what it's like being an electrical engineer, talk about how amateur radio got me started down that path, and then I'll usually take a radio station into the school and let the kids experience amateur radio on the air. It's usually one of the most popular activities at all the career days I've been at. Again, not really complicated or expensive or difficult things to do, and great ways to introduce new people to amateur radio. So with that, let me see if there's any questions or comments before I talk about the director situation a little bit. Any thoughts on any of this? Have maybe you all tried something that worked well that you'd like to highlight, or any questions at all?
I do have a comment.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, in case you don't see me, I'm Ray KB1LRL, and just to let you know that you know, as your board and elected officers of the club, I support Fred and really encourage you to, in your board meetings, stuff like that, you should really look at coming up with some programs to encourage this type of activity. I'm looking at the roster, the group there. I see a lot of gray hair. You really need to have some vision and to look at the big picture to see what you need to do to keep the club growing. Now, it's encouraging to see that there's a lot of KC1 call signs in there, so there's some fairly new hands here. And I think that that's a good opportunity to come up with something to make the club grow and to also sustain the club for years down the road. And the reason why I say this is because I've got one club just up the road from you guys, Lunenburg, Montechusett Club, that is basically on life support. And it's for the very reason why I say this, because they've lost their focus and they've really stopped doing this. And right now, I've had to take over that club once again in order to try to give that club CPR. And I'm trying to get something brought back into that so we can get that thing going. Our club just turned 70 years old. I'd like to keep it going longer, but I don't want to see any other clubs fall into the same path. So that's why I just want to encourage you to come up with some programs to inspire this learning in any fashion, as long as you're outreaching, as long as you're encouraging, mentoring. I've been a strong supporter of mentoring ever since I became section manager. So I just wanted to throw that out to you guys. And at that point, I'll turn it back over. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Ray. Just a couple thoughts on all this kind of stuff. It doesn't really take a lot to get something like this started. Most of the programs that I talked about tonight were started by no more than 3 or 4 people. And some of them were just one or two individuals that really got things rolling. We kept building on them, listening to the folks who were trying to help to understand what we got right and improve the things that we didn't get right. And, one of the other things that happened is as we started to get some traction on these things, a lot of the people that had been in the club for a while came back and joined in because they saw that we were really making a positive difference. The other thing I would say is to the comment about some of the KC1s and the new folks, in our experience, the new folks make some of the best people to do these programs for 2 reasons. First of all, they're trying to learn at the same time, and they get as much out of some of these learning experiences as the people they're trying to help. If you have to run a boot camp exercise and show somebody how to put a 20-meter dipole up, that means you have to learn how to put a 20-meter dipole up in order to teach it. And it's not a bad thing for the new folks to be in the lead on some of this stuff. It actually is very helpful. The other thing about it is that the fact that many of those folks are doing these things for the first time tends to make them very enthusiastic about the learning experience. And that comes through to everybody, including the folks that you're trying to help. So this doesn't necessarily all have to be only a strain on your most experienced people in the club who probably have a lot going on. Involving the new folks and creating some of these programs can work really, really well. Particularly, you saw some of the stars of our group. Abby, our 13-year-old extra, teaches license classes. She teaches part of boot camp. She's always doing training at field days. She runs fox hunts. And all of those things were things that she learned how to do and quickly turned around and basically helped others to learn the same way she did. So, that might open some additional doors for you all to think about of who might in your club want to get involved in some of this stuff. Other comments or suggestions, questions, observations, anything at all on any of this stuff before we talk about the election a little bit?
Yeah, I have something I wanted to say about COVID and how has that affected the mentoring process?
Yeah, great question, Selena. It's made it different. Now, most of what I've shown you here, we've done in the context of COVID. So what I'll try and do is talk about how COVID changed things a little bit to answer your question. So for example, with Eris contacts, we actually do many of these over Zoom right now. When COVID was really bad, one of the things that I did, and I'm actually part of the ARIS program. I operate a ground station, I mentor school, I do pretty much everything you can do in ARIS. We created a setup where the kids could get on Zoom from their laptops at home, do the contact, and we would actually bridge the amateur radio equipment either in my station or some other ground station somewhere in the world onto Zoom, so the kids could still talk to the astronaut. We have TV cameras on the antennas and the radios. So we made it about as close as we could to being there as you could get and still be safe. One of the many advantages of that is we find that it's very easy to get a television crew to jump on Zoom after one of these contacts, interview the kids, and get them on the 5 and 6 o'clock news. That actually got easier for us because the TV stations didn't have to send out a camera crew and reporters anymore. They could invest 15 or 20 minutes for the interview right afterwards on Zoom, and then produce a really nice spot. And if you look around, look at the Bishop Girton High School amateur radio contact. That was one that we did in the COVID era here in New Hampshire. You will find spots, I think, on MUR and some of the Boston stations where the reporters covered it. Ham Boot Camp, as I mentioned, we teach almost exclusively on Zoom right now for COVID safety reasons. The session that I taught in schools for credit, that elective thing, was also done over Zoom. Almost all the classrooms have Zoom setups in them. So, all of that works as well. So what I would say is COVID changed things, and it certainly, we lost out on the personal contact thing, which is probably the big downside, but it also opened the door to reach a lot more people. And, as an ARIS mentor, I've worked with schools in Australia, New Zealand, Holland, Italy, all over the United States, South America. And I've had a chance to bring amateur radio to all those places. And, had it not been for COVID, my ability to do that would have been, much reduced. So I don't know, I guess it's different, Selena. It's not, I don't think it's not necessarily as good as one-on-one contact, but it's not all bad either. Again, the key to all this is just being a little creative. And don't let anything get in your way. Then don't take no for an answer. those are the things I think that work the best in all these situations. Other questions or comment? Anything at all? All right. If you do have some thoughts, and I will drop a copy of this presentation in the chat so you can download it. You can find me at AB1OC@ARL.net. And if you're interested in doing any of these projects, or maybe you want to talk more about working with a school on a space station contact or whatever, I'm all in to help you with any or all of that. So what I'd like to do now is just talk real briefly about the race that's going on for ARL New England Director. Of course, I'm one of the 3 candidates, Fred Kemmerer, AB1OC. Don't mix me up with the other Fred. There are 2 Freds in the race. I just want to talk a little bit about what I'm trying to do and my vision for what I think we can do together for the ARL and for the New England division. So there are lots of issues that need to get addressed. There are operational issues inside the league. We talked a little bit about the fact that our bands and our rights as hams to have antennas and stuff like that are under siege. I think you'll be my 34th or 35th club that I've met with in the last 4 months. And so I've heard a lot from a lot of great people about things that need to be improved. I've kind of boiled that down to a handful of basic things that are kind of my top priorities, that I believe if we do these things, we will gain ground on many of the issues that we're facing. So the first of all is, and there's probably no surprise given my presentation tonight, we really need to bring new people into amateur radio. It's super important that we do that. In my mind, both the ARRL and all of you have important roles to play in this process. The ARL needs to do a much better job of outreach to new hams and provide resources for them, and also resources to all of you to find people who are looking for that outreach so you can help them. The other thing I would say is that as fine as the staff is in Newington, there aren't near enough of those people to actually make a significant dent in any of these problems. They need all of you to help. With the number of people that we know are out there that are already licensed and looking for clubs like yours, to do outreach and mentor them. If we even get 10% of the clubs in New England to do more in that area, it's going to make a tremendous difference in the support for amateur radio and, quite frankly, the strength and membership of the league. Closely behind that, we need to be about promoting amateur radio and getting the public to be aware of the value that amateur radio brings. You know, how many times have you been in a conversation with some folks who aren't hams and talking up amateur radio, which I know probably many of you do, and someone will make a comment like, "Oh, that amateur radio thing, do people still do that?" Right? I mean, you just want to cry when you hear that. Not only do we need to be about helping new people in the hobby, but we need to be much more proactive about making the benefits that amateur radio brings to the general public in terms of emergency communications, to young people in terms of the directions for their future and their lives, and just for the general goodwill and fun that it creates for all of us. You know, a lot has been made about communications. And, you know, I just looked at the latest QST and saw for the first time that I can remember an actual report on an ARL directors meeting of what went on there. I don't know if any of you picked your latest QST up yet and saw that, but I took that as a very good sign. But, you know, part of the problem with the way we're doing communications is we're in broadcast mode. You know, the ARL board goes off and they do something. Maybe they form a committee and they study it and they come up with a policy, and they'll hire somebody on the staff to do it, and then they'll try to explain what they did to the members. And while it's good that they did that, the fact that we kind of operated without more member input, and we didn't let the members know what we were doing as we went, usually creates a situation where even if the answer is a good one, people are skeptical or maybe upset about it because they weren't involved. I think that communications needs to be about listening to the members in New England and acting on what they're concerned about. It's one of the reasons I'm spending so much time in club meetings. It's also the reason that I've done now 2 town hall meetings with, and will continue to do these going forward, with everybody in New England invited to come and ask questions and express opinions so that I can be aware and fully appreciate the things that you all are worried about. You know how I feel about the importance of STEM learning in schools and college. I think that's a very important step to support the first 2 items on the list, bringing new people into the hobby and getting public support. And then lastly, and I guess this is one of the things that makes maybe my approach as director different from others. You know, the director's job in the ARL is defined very narrowly to work in a board process to determine what the policies are of the ARL. That's all a director has to do. And technically, you can meet the minimum requirements by showing up for 2 board meetings a year, and that's it. You don't have to do anything else. I think for a job this important, you should expect a hell of a lot more out of somebody you choose for that than just 2 board meetings and sitting on a couple committees. So I'm going to take an approach that also involves trying to work and encourage the section managers, the field staff, and most importantly, all of you to work on some of the same problems that the ARL is working on and try to develop solutions that work within New England. You know, Ham Boot Camp is a great example of getting that right. A program that we created locally here that the ARL helped promote. We refined it. We've now served over 750 people. With the next one, it'll probably be over 850 people. And it's a nationwide program. It's very successful. Is that a replacement for what the ARL does? No, definitely not. But if we do that and what the ARL does, and particularly we try to merge the 2 together so that the ARL is paying attention to some of the programs that we create here in New England and make successful as a way to set their policy nationwide, imagine how much faster and how much more effective both fronts will be. And so that's definitely something that I'm looking to do as part of the process. Now, the other thing that I think is really important is there are too many issues to have directors who are specialists and kind of one-person bands. You know, it's impossible for one person to be fully versed and be able to make good policy without involving other people. And so I've been very, very fortunate. I've managed to build a very accomplished team of folks who are literally helping me on a daily basis to understand important issues and formulate policy. And I just wanted to introduce you to a few of these people, who they are. So Phil Temples, the current vice director, is the person that got me involved in this race and has been a great advisor on all things ARRL and amateur radio in general. Corey Golub, who's the assistant section manager and traffic manager in Maine, is on the team. Larry Cranston, a prominent club president here in Massachusetts. Rob Macedo, Mr. Skywarn, and heavily involved in ARIS, is on the team, helping me to formulate emergency communications policy. Marsha Ford, who is at the center of traffic handling for pretty much all of Massachusetts, is helping me as well. Rob Leiden, who's had a list of roles a mile long, including section manager in Eastern New York, president of multiple radio clubs, and heavily involved in emergency communications. Ray LaJoy, who's on the call here, the current Western Massachusetts section manager. Jack Ciacia, who moved here from Colorado, was a section manager out there and did groundbreaking work in revitalizing ARIS in Colorado, is also on the team. The way we operate is we have a Slack channel, which we use on literally many times a day to talk about issues that are coming up, to give me input on what folks that have a lot of experience in these areas think is the right way for the ARL to proceed. And those folks are going to stay on the team after we're elected. And I hope to continue to expand it with experts like this. This is how you cover a wide range of issues and make good policy. And I think you should be expecting all of your directors to have something like this in place. For those of you who don't know me, I spent most of my working career as a business executive in some middle-sized and large companies. And every one of those executive leadership jobs were pretty important jobs. Some of them involved managing hundreds of people or some very large businesses or both. Came with an understanding that when I got the job, or whoever got the job, I had about 100 days to prove I could do it, or they would remove me and get somebody else. We also have a joke for it, or a name for it, I guess. We used to always say that we had our 100-day window to decide if we were going to get to keep the job that we got. I think that being your director is a pretty darn important job. And so I decided that I ought to have a 100-day plan, my commitment to the division of things I will get done in the first 100 days I'm in office. And I expect people to hold me accountable to this. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time here. Many of you probably have seen this already, but just a couple highlights. I've had a lot of experience on industry boards, some of them pretty challenging, large ones. I did particularly one board in the telecommunications space, which had all of the major operators, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, the cable companies, Comcast, and others, and all of the telecom vendors in the world. And my job was to create an agenda of projects that those people would work together on to get things done. That's a pretty diverse group of folks that don't agree on much. I was good enough at it that after I retired, the organization Addis that had me doing it actually paid me as a consultant to keep doing it. So apparently they were fairly happy with the results. And I think that experience is very useful and applicable to my role as a director in the ARL. I could tell you that that's all about working with people on a one-on-one basis to understand their issues and find and create common ground. That's how you get a bunch of people who don't agree on much to agree to work together and get something meaningful done. You already heard a little bit about what I'm doing on communications. We will continue to hold town hall meetings, probably at least 2 of them a year. Even though there are only 2 board meetings, I expect to have at least 4 cabinet meetings, which will involve all the club presidents, all the section staff, and anybody in New England who cares to join in. And we're going to begin every one of those meetings with a readout on what we learned in our last town hall and on social media and email reflectors and so on. And that's going to set the agenda for what we do in those meetings and what I work on, not the other way around. As far as getting programs going in New England across the division, the way I'm going to do that is through initially a series of 4 assistant directors who will be people that I appoint to work along with me and with all of you to try to get activities going and mentoring in Newham development, work in schools and STEM learning and youth outreach. Very important promotion of emergency communications and public service activities. And also anything we can do to get our spectrum better utilized and particularly protect the higher bands that we're in the process of losing due to lack of support from the FCC. And then lastly, those of all who know me know that I believe in clubs as the solution to a lot of these problems. And I've had some great success along with a great group of people here in New Hampshire in getting a lot of stuff done that has helped a lot of people. I think if we're going to ask or hope that you all will get to be part of that mission, we got to spend time in your space. As I mentioned, I think I can't remember if you're club 34 or 35. I've lost a little bit of track that I've been in front of with this story in the last 4 or 5 months. And that's not a flash in the pan to get elected. That's the start of what I expect to be doing for the next 3 years. I will personally commit to attend at least 6 club meetings a quarter. If you all stay on Zoom, I can probably do 3 or 4 times that many. And I'm going to expect every single one of my assistant directors to do the same thing. And that's how we're going to work together going forward. And that's my commitment to all of you, things that we get done right away. So to close on all this, and before we take questions, several folks have asked me, Fred, why are you doing this? What's your motive? And for me, it's really pretty simple. I grew up in Pennsylvania in a pretty poor family. Neither of my parents finished high school. And I would not have had any chance to do any of this stuff or lead anything at all had it not been for an uncle when I was in my early life, probably 10, 12 years old, got me involved in electronics, shortwave listening, and amateur radio. It changed my life. It changed my life. Everything that I've had the opportunity to do since that point in time has all come as a result of involvement in amateur radio. And so when I say amateur radio changes lives, and I know many of you have stories like this, I really think it does. And my goal in retirement is very simple. I'm going to devote all my time and all my energy to making that life-changing experience happen for as many people as I possibly can. And I think being your director is a good way for me to expand my ability to do that, and more importantly, get all of you involved in doing it too. So with that, I'm going to stop. Any questions, comments, any feedback, anything that you're concerned about that you think we should be working on to improve either in amateur radio or in the ARL? Anything at all?
So I have a couple of questions.
Sure, go ahead.
The first question is about FT8. It's a nice new technology, not that terribly useful for communicating, but very good for contesting. It seems to be dominating a lot of the contests that have sideband and CW, particularly the VHF contest, and now I'm hearing about 10 meters. So that's the first question. The second question is waveforms in general. I'm part of the Mars program, and many of our nets are mixed mode. We have voice for I'll call it the housekeeping of the net, check in, check out, list traffic, and then digital for sending the traffic. Except for 160 meters, there are no frequencies in the ham bands at which you can run a combination voice and digital net to pass traffic.
Yep. And also some severe restrictions on even places to do the digital modes cost effectively for that type of traffic. So let's take the FT8 thing first. I saw a statistic about a year ago that based on Logbook of the World, the ARL estimated that over 60% of all traffic on the HF bands was now FT8. Okay. That means that it is probably one of the most popular, if not the most popular modes that there are. What I would tell you from my own experience is it's a great way for folks who are relatively new in the hobby to get an HF station together and have a lot of fun without spending too much money on big antennas or doing a lot of really challenging things in terms of station building. I will also tell you that most hams who do it burn out on it fairly quickly and want more than that. Okay. And on the contest specific area, I've had a lot of folks in the contest community point out that say, hey, this is ruining the VHF contest or whatever. Nobody does CW, hardly anybody does sideband. It's kind of taken over. And, what I would say is we're probably not going to make it go away, given how popular it is. But one thing we can do is we could do a little better job of mentoring the folks in contests and the folks that are on the bands to introduce them to sideband, help them learn CW so that they can try new things. I find from my personal experience and most hams that if they're given the opportunity to do something new in amateur radio without having to jump through really high hurdles, that most hams will at least try it. And many of them
I
will
would be the
stick with
last person to want to stamp FT8 out, but here's the rub on at least the VHF contests. You can only work a station once per band per mode. Why not make it once? I'm sorry, once per band. Why not once per band per mode so that once you work them on FT8, now I'll work them on CW and work them on sideband, and that would probably encourage the other modes back again.
Yep, I think that's a good rule. Some contests already do that. So, for example, I've been in the EME contests, and they absolutely work the way you're suggesting, Terry. That you basically can, get credit for working the station, the entity, whatever, the grid square, whatever it is that the contest is based around. Probably for most VHF and above, it'll be the grid square. Again, in different modes. And in fact, in some contests, like for example, EME, you get much higher points for making the contact on, say, sideband, which is very difficult to do, or on CW than you do with FT8, or the equivalent in that case, JT65. So I think those are good rules. I think that anything that encourages diversity and broad use of all of our modes and bands and frequencies is generally a good thing. And I do think there's a lot that we need to do because, I've had a lot of experience with getting new hams involved in amateur radio. The average new ham, will get a simple 100-watt radio together. They'll get a basic antenna system. Maybe if they're on HF, it'll probably be a wire antenna on maybe only one band or maybe a multi-band antenna. And FT8 is attractive because it makes that station reach out much further than CW or sideband ever can. But especially if the contesting is a little different because in some sense it's kind of like the Etch-a-Sketch. You turn the thing over and shake it, and you start over at the beginning of every contest, right? But for the average ham that just wants to make contacts, FT8 actually gets old pretty quick. And it's important that we do work to bring and help those people along, get involved in sideband, learn CW, and experience the full breadth of what amateur radio can bring. I think that's important. So, and what was your second question, Terry? Again, just make sure I get the whole thing.
Yes, I'm a Mars operator, and our nets, we handle some traffic. We use a mode called Mil Standard 188 M110A, which is what the DoD folks use. And it takes up a whole voice channel.
Yep.
We can send actually as fast as 2,400 bits per second, but most of the time we use 600 or 300 because signal to noise ratio and equipment doesn't work well above that. So I guess there's two parts of this question. One, when can we get use of a better use of a voice channel to send digital, either MT63 or M110A? And then what about getting some frequencies where a traffic net can operate in a mixed mode of voice to do the housekeeping of the net and digital to send the traffic?
Yeah, good questions. So first of all, you may not be aware of this, but there is a band plan revision proposal and a bandwidth symbol rate proposal that the ARL has in front of the FCC right now, both of which would help with this problem. The band plan proposal allocates some more wider band frequencies for digital traffic handling that would allow much more effective networks to be built. And the symbol rate piece is about not limiting on HF digital transmissions by baud rate, which, as you know now, below 10 meters is only limited to 300 baud, but more limiting based on bandwidth, which, given modern technologies that are available for digital communications on HF bands, would allow for much more robust stuff, and also would allow us to have a wider range of protocols available and maybe get away from some of the expensive stuff that at least some traffic handlers use, like PACTOR, that is really expensive because of IPR encumbrances. As far as mixed operation goes, I don't know about that. I do agree that having the ability to mix voice and data in the same session is necessary, but I'm not 100% sure that has to be done necessarily with having the digital traffic and the voice traffic on the same frequency. I do think there needs to be very clear spaces to do both. and we need to have adequate bandwidth for the digital handling part of the process. Knowing how the current band plans work, having a scenario where we have significant blocks of bandwidth for voice and data on the same frequency, I think will be very, very tough to get through either the amateur radio community or the FCC. So I guess that's a partial answer to your question. I think the mixed modes are important. I'm not sure about how practical it is to get that all done on the same frequencies, but I do think that having well-established sort of modern frequency allocations for the digital part of the traffic would help the process a lot. Other questions or comments on anything at all?
Fred, is there any chance of getting 4 meters brought back? I know Europe has it. I have a 4-meter antenna. I can't use it. I don't understand why the FCC is opposed to it.
Well, mostly because they've sold it for commercial use, so we'd have to take it back. I think that'll be pretty tough. To be honest with you, the bigger problem is to avoid the FCC from taking away more of our bands. You know, we just lost 3 gigahertz. And I could tell you, most of my work as a professional was around cellular systems. We're going to lose 5 and 10 gigahertz unless we do something fairly quickly. Those are actually better. Those are higher value bands than certainly even the 3 gigahertz band was, because they're wider. There's, I think, some 250 or 275 megahertz blocks on 5 and 10 gigahertz. Also, there's a lot of Wi-Fi stuff that already works on 5 gigahertz, which makes that prime real estate not only for the cellular operators, but for commercial use as well. What I would say about all of this kind of stuff is 2 things are important. One is we need to do a better job of using those bands, and particularly if we don't build good wide area data networks in 5 and 10 gigahertz, which are some of the best applications for broad use of those frequencies, we will lose them too, guaranteed. And then secondly, this all goes back to the public support and awareness for amateur radio. One of the reasons the FCC feels free to reallocate these bands is they don't think that many people care about them. And the part of the problem with that is that back in the 70s, 80s, 90s even, the public saw the value of amateur radio, and the politicians, and the FCC are politicians, I can tell you from experience working on something called the FCC Technical Advisory Committee, the FCC is absolutely very sensitive to public pressure. I saw it happen in the day-to-day operations of the work I was involved in there. Is that if we can get the public more aware of amateur radio and the importance of having it, and if we can do a better job of utilizing the frequencies we have, we will hold on to our spectrum, and that probably creates the case for us to try to get some more in certain slots as well. As far as 4 megahertz go, I'd have to go look at what's in that commercial part of the spectrum. But what we'd have to look at there is, because that area is regional to maybe even more than regional, depending how you want to look at it, we'd probably have to displace something else to get that back in the United States. And I'm going to guess that might be pretty tough.
You just hit on something that I was going to talk about actually, which is promoting ham radio to the general public. And we're not really doing very much of that at all. I mean, because we could get a lot of the general public interested in becoming hams as well. You're mostly talking about schools and things like that, but we're not doing publicity or anything, anything else to the public.
Yep. So a couple things there, so good stuff. First of all, note the thing that I showed about Field Day and getting TV coverage for it. That's an example of something that was much broader than just schools, right? So you're right. You can't do it all through schools. You got to do it on a broad basis. Here's a place where the league needs to do something important. We have had a position open for Director of Public Relations, and also for another position that was in charge of basically social media PR. Those jobs should have been filled a long time ago with top people. And one of the things that just baffles the heck out of me, and I believe is an important role for the board to pay attention to, is why aren't those jobs filled with top people? In some ways, you could easily argue that that job has more impact than any other position in staff, right?
Yep.
We should be figuring out what it costs to get somebody who's truly good at doing that, somebody who knows how to run national public relations campaign and has a demonstrated track record. We should have a salary base for those jobs that's commensurate with getting top people, because I don't think there's hardly anything that's more important. And we need to find out why the hell they're not filled yet.
Yeah.
Right. And beyond that, this goes back to some of the work that I want to do within the division. If I become your director, there are some people here who are good at this stuff. And we will have those folks put together an opportunity for everybody in the division to learn about how to do public relations activities more effectively, both on social media and in the general media press. Again, this is a skill that we all need to be practicing. You know, you all do field day activities, you do stuff on your repeater systems, you probably have folks that are doing ARIS activities or maybe Skywarn in your club. You all need to have ready access to tools of how you can promote that and make it visible to the general public, because, you know, the ARL's got an important role to play here with some top people, but we have a pretty important role to play here as well. And hopefully the stuff that I shared earlier gives you an example of that shows that that's reachable for an amateur radio club. I mean, we are not the ARL. We do not have an expensive public relations. You are looking at the public relations manager for the Nashua Radio Society. Okay, I'm it. And if we were able to get the kinds of coverage that we've been able to generate, you all can too. You just need a little bit of help to figure out how to go about it. And I think it's extremely important. It's something that we all need to be about. It's one of the reasons that it made my top hitters list.
If I could add to that as well, one of our members there, Larry Cranston, W1 AST out of Springfield, he is actually putting together a big public event at the Big E for September of 2022. So the raw numbers that came in from this last event was record breaking. So we are going to have a big presence at the Big E for next September. And one of the things we will be looking for is people to help staff that, to answer questions and do whatever's necessary to make that a big success. So keep that in mind if you're looking to get involved in something with public awareness.
Yep, great example of what you can do. Thank you, Ray, for bringing that up. Other questions, comments, observations, anything at all?
Victor here, excuse me, K1VEA. I'm concerned about the venues to reach young people. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with my voice. And I'm having the ideas.
Excuse me, I'm kind of having, we lost your audio there a little bit. Could you try again, maybe get a little closer to the mic?
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, we can hear you better now.
Okay, the venues for reaching young people through schools, teachers. Only a certain number of teachers have the bandwidth to do their regular job, plus take this on. I like the idea of what other venues are there to reach young people.
Beyond teachers. Go beyond teachers.
Go beyond the teachers. In other words, if you can't get into school because they can't find a teacher to sponsor you.
Yeah, good question. And by the way, not all schools will engage. So you're exactly right. And many of the teachers are under a lot of pressure for test scores and other things. So sometimes
I'm not putting teachers down. God knows they have so many demands on their professional time. You know, they gotta have a life too.
Yeah, so a few thoughts on that one. First of all, there are many schools in most of our areas, and so if you run up against a brick wall with one, one of the things that we've been successful with here is trying others. But beyond that, it doesn't just have to be schools. The Scouts and JOTA are another great avenue that's relatively easy to get into. And another one I've had some experience with is local boys and girls clubs. Many of these groups are appealing to sort of underprivileged kids that are looking for activities. It's very easy to get an engagement with a boys or girls club around amateur radio. I've been in several of them. I remember one here in Nashua where I parked my truck with a screwdriver antenna up next to the Boys and Girls Club. We ran a coax in the door, and we spent a whole day with the kids there doing amateur radio and having fun with them. So, what I would say is this. You don't necessarily have to blanket your area with this, if you just find one public organization, a scouting troop, a boys and girls club, some folks have had success with senior centers. Doesn't have to necessarily be even young people, or a school. Also consider private schools as well as public schools. Private schools, sometimes it can be a little bit easier to get into because many of them are more geared toward the STEM learning. And you don't necessarily need all of the teachers. You just need one good contact who believes in what you're doing to get started. And that's all it takes. So what I would say is try to focus on a lot of different fronts till you find somebody who's supportive, and then, build your activity out from there.
Makes sense.
Thanks for asking that question. It's a good one. Other questions or comments on anything at all? All right. Well, folks, I don't want to overstay my welcome. I want to thank you all for a great session. And no matter what happens with the election thing, please consider doing something to do outreach to new hams to bring folks in the hobby. It is critically important that we all try and focus on that right now. Also, please vote. There is no more important thing to do relative to the ARRL than to pick your next director, and because the issues that we're facing are becoming urgent. And so whoever you choose, pick someone that you can hold accountable for solving the things that you care about. Your ballots should all be in your hands by now. They have to be back at headquarters by the 19th of November by noontime. That probably means you want to try and mail them at least a week ahead of time so you're sure that they're there and get counted. Also, lastly, if there's anything I can do to help you all on any of the stuff we talked about tonight, please reach out to me. It's all I do 24/7 is work on promoting amateur radio. So that's what I'm here for. AB1OC at ARL.net.
Quick question, Fred.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead, Steve.
I'm Steven Saluza, K1SAC.
Yeah.
In this organization that is based on technology, is there any way to vote other than those postcards?
Not at this point in time, although I think there's something, it's a good question. It's something we've discussed in our Slack channel. And I know that there's work to consider having a way to do it online. Obviously there are security issues and stuff that have to be thought through with doing that. And, the other thing about this is all this stuff costs money. And it would be nice if going forward, the ARL was a little more focused on how we can use modern electronic means to make ourselves more efficiently. So the money that is spent on the right things.
Thanks.
Yep.
And thanks for the presentation. Really enjoyed it.
Great. Enjoyed it. By the way, I did just put a link where you can download the presentation in the chat. So if you all want to grab a copy, you're welcome to do that. And again, you know how to find me if there's anything at all I can do to help. So with that, I'll turn it back to, I'm not sure if it's Brian or Greg.
Thank you, Fred. Much appreciated. Great presentation. That was awesome. I'm actually going to turn it over to George. I don't know if he has anything else. George, K3RLZ, my friend, do you have anything else?
I got a message from George. He had to step out for a minute.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, Fred, thank you very much. Great presentation. And 400 and something members. That's outstanding. Yeah, good for you. Good for your club, and that's awesome.
Well, remember, if you all decide to really take on the mentoring role and New Ham development, you probably end up bigger than we are.
Yeah.
So please, please, please think about what you might want to do there. It's really important. It's also make a huge difference for your club.
Thank you, Fred, and good luck in the election.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And thanks for the opportunity to be part of your meeting. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you. You stop by anytime. You're more than welcome here.
Well, if you careful what you ask for. If I get elected, you may end up seeing more of me than you might imagine.
All right. Well, if you can deal with us, we can deal with you.
All right. That's the plan. That'll work.
You're welcome to come by even if you don't get elected.
I probably
Absolutely.
will do some of that. Right now, I'm counting on success. So we'll think about the alternative if we get there. Hopefully, we won't.
Absolutely. Think positive, Fred. Good luck to you, my friend. Thank you again.
Yep.
All right, everyone. We'll have a great night.
If anybody
sorry.
wants to watch the presentation again, it will be on our YouTube channel.
Oh, good. Thank you, Selena. Send me a link to that or to your YouTube channel. I might want to post that if you don't mind.
Okay.
Be some good press for your club, if nothing else.
Okay.
So Selena, can you stop the recording now?
Yes.